Turn, if you will, to Acts, the 3rd chapter, and let's read once again the passage that we have been studying here for the last few weeks. Acts, the 3rd chapter, and we're going to begin in verse 1. Now Peter and John went up together into the temple at the hour of prayer, being the 9th hour. And a certain lame man from his mother's womb was carried, whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple, which is called Beautiful, to ask alms of them that entered into the temple. Who, seeing Peter and John about to go into the temple, asked an alms. And Peter, fastening his eyes upon him with John, said, Look on us. And he gave him heed unto them, expecting to receive something of them. Then Peter said, Silver and gold have I none, but such as I have I give thee. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. And he took him by the right hand and lifted him up, and immediately his feet and his ankle bones received strength. And he, leaping up, stood and walked and entered into the temple, walking and leaping and praising God. And all the people saw him walking and praising God, and they knew that it was he which sat for alms at the beautiful gate of the temple. And they were filled with wonder and amazement at that which had happened unto him. All right, we have been talking about this passage for the last few Sunday evenings. We're going to conclude our discussion here tonight. If you remember the last time, we looked at a particular phrase that Peter said in verse 6. As they were entering into the temple, the lame man, as was his custom, if you will, asked for alms of everyone who was going through the beautiful gate into the temple area. And so he saw Peter and John going into the temple, and so he asked them also for alms. And we remember that alms very simply was a donation for the poor. And so he was asking for a donation. This was his only way of making a living and his only way of supporting himself. And so they carried him daily to the beautiful gate, and there he asked for alms. Peter and John said, Look upon us. And Peter said, in response to the lame man asking for alms, he said, Silver and gold have I none. Silver and gold had I none. Now, looking back at our last discussion, our last study on this, what is meant here by that phrase, silver and gold have I none? You remember? Okay, he didn't have any money. He didn't have any silver. He didn't have any gold. In fact, Peter and John were most likely a lot like who? Jesus. Okay, what did Jesus have? He had nothing. Jesus said, I have nowhere to lay my head. Foxes have holes, but I don't have a place that I can lay my head. In fact, Jesus, his only possession was what? The clothes that was on his back. And so he didn't have any earthly possessions. He didn't have any material. And Peter and John and the rest of the apostles were also like that. And so when he said unto the lame man, Silver and gold have I none, he was telling him, he was being honest with him, that they don't have any possessions like that they could give him. But did Peter have something that he could give this man? In fact, he did. In fact, he goes on to say, And such as I have, I give thee. Now, what did Peter give to the lame man?
The miracle of being able to walk again.
Okay. God through Peter, Christ through Peter, healed the man, and he was able to walk again. But I want to ask this question. What else did he give him?
Well, he must have gave him Christ because he was going in and shouting Christ.
Okay.
Praising him.
Okay, went in, he praised him. What else did he give him? The fact of the matter is, yes, he did God did through Peter, Christ did through Peter heal this man. Gave him his health, his ability to walk. But there are other things that Peter and John also gave that man that day that you and I can give today to those who are in need. In fact, there are things that we really don't think of. And so when I asked that question, what else did Peter and John give them, it really didn't surprise me that no one else come up with these two particular answers. Because we don't really think about these things. Yet when we stop and we think about them, we see that they're true, and they're all things, both things, that we can give to those that are in need. All right, now somebody might say, okay, Tom, what else did Peter and John give to this man? Well, Peter and John gave this man their time. Their time. And that is something that we can give to people that are in need today. We can give them our time. Now, any problem with that? Any problem with that? Anybody? We shouldn't have a problem with it. But yet, we don't give them time. Why?
We're too busy.
Oh, Janet says we're busy. Is that right? We're busy. And there might be those who will say, well, you know what, that's all well and good, Tom, that Peter and John gave them some time. But you can't ask us to do the same thing because we're busy people. Well, what in the world do we have to do? Well, Tom, let me tell you what I got. I got a family. I've got a job. I've got responsibilities. I've got this social club that I've got to go to the meeting tonight. I've got to go to a sporting event. I've got, well, my grandkids, they're having recitals this week. I've got to go to the recitals. I've got a tea time with the fellas tomorrow. I've got to go play golf tomorrow. Or ladies, I've got time to set up with the girls to go eat lunch. I'm busy, 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 busy. I don't have time to give my time to someone in need. So are we saying Peter wasn't busy? What a question that is. Was Peter busy? He was busy. In fact, what did he just finish doing in Acts chapter 2? He preached the first gospel sermon. He preached to thousands of people. And in Acts chapter 2 and verse 41, we are told that 30,000 of them repented and they were baptized. He was busy. Where was he going? Where was it going in Acts chapter 3? Verse 1. Okay, they were going into the temple. And they were going into the temple at the hour of prayer, which is the 9th hour. And so why were they going into the temple? Okay, other people would be there. They went there. Perhaps they were going there to preach. But even more importantly, they were going there because, as Dave said, there were other people there. And so he was going there to do what? To teach and to preach.
I figured out how they, the Jewish leaders put up with that. So, I even thought they had really, been stirred up about going to the temple and preaching and teaching like that.
Well, you go into chapter 4, didn't they get a little stirred up about that? Well, they certainly did. But he went there to preach. Did he preach? Yes, he did. Beginning in verse 12 of this chapter, going through the rest of the chapter, Peter preached unto all those that were gathered on Solomon's porch. He was, you see the point we're making here. He was busy. He had things to do. He had places to be. He had sermons to teach. But yet he had the time to give his time to those who were in need. Can we think of anyone else who gave his time to those who were in need? Jesus did. Now, was Jesus busy?
Yes, he was.
Yes, he was. Jesus had places to be. He had people to see. He had things to do. He had sermons to teach. And how much time did he have to do it all?
Not very long.
Not very long. Do we have more time today than what Jesus did?
Yeah.
Yes, we do. From the time that Jesus began his ministry until his death upon the cross and resurrection and his ascension into heaven, we're talking about how much time went by.
Over 1,000 days.
Yeah, or
3 years.
3 years. 3 years. So he had very little time to accomplish the things that he had to accomplish. But yet he had time for a lot of different people. For example, he had time for the poor widow woman who had just lost her only son. Turn to Luke chapter 17. Luke chapter 7. And let's begin reading in verse 11. Now, as we read through these verses, ask yourself, was Jesus busy? Luke chapter 7. Let's begin reading in verse 11. And I'm going to read these next few passages from the New King James Version of the Bible. Luke chapter 7, beginning in verse 11. Now it happened the day after that he. Okay, now who's he?
Jesus.
Okay, he is Jesus. Jesus back up in verse 9. Now it happened the day after that he, Jesus, went into the city of Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and a large crowd. And when he was come near the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the city was with her. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said to her, do not weep. Then he came and he touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still, and he said, young man, I say to you, arise. And so he who was dead sat up and began to speak. And he presented him to his mother. Then fear came upon all, and they glorified God, saying, a great prophet has risen up among us. God has visited his people. And this report about him went throughout all of Judea and the surrounding region. Now, friends, tell me, was Jesus busy? He was going someplace, wasn't he? Where was he going? Verse 11, verse 12. Where was he going? He was going to Nain. In fact, in verse 12, he had yet to arrive there. And we're told he came to the gate of that city. So he was going someplace. But yet he had time to give to this woman who was in need. Luke chapter 7? Yeah, Luke chapter 7. I did say 17, then I corrected myself. Luke chapter 7, verses 11, verse 12. He was on his way to Nain. Was at the gate of the city. And he took time to help this woman. He also had time for a woman who had a spirit of infirmity. Now you may wonder, what's infirmity? Well, infirmity very simply means a weakness of body. And so she had a weakness of body. In fact, it seems that as we read here from Luke chapter 13, that she was bent over because of the weakness of her body. So let's turn to Luke chapter 13. Now once again, ask yourself the question, as we read these verses, was Jesus busy? Luke chapter 13. Let's notice what we're told beginning in verse 10. Luke 13 and 10. Now he, who's he? He is Jesus. Back up in verse 2. And he was teaching. Was he doing something? Was he busy? Yes, he was busy. He was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And behold, there was a woman who had a spirit of infirmity 18 years and was bent over and could in no way rise herself up. But when Jesus saw her, he called her to him and said to her, Woman, you are loosed from your infirmity. And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight and glorified God. He was busy, and he was teaching. But yet he had time to give to this woman who was in need. You ever heard of a man by the name of blind Bartimaeus? Well, blind Bartimaeus is someone who Jesus had time for. Turn to Mark chapter 10. And we're going to begin reading in verse 46. And once again, we ask that you ask yourself the question, was Jesus busy? Was he busy? And so let's begin in Mark chapter 10. We're going to begin reading in verse 46 of this passage. Mark 10, 46. Now they came to Jericho as he, who's he? Jesus, back in verse 38. As he went out of Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude, blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the road begging. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and to say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Then many warned him to be quiet. But he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. So Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called. Then they called the blind man, saying to him, Be of good cheer, rise, he is calling you. And he threw aside his garment, and he rose, and he came to Jesus. So Jesus answered and said to him, What do you want me to do for you? The blind man said, Rabbi, that I might receive my sight. Then Jesus said to him, Go your way. Your faith has made you well. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus on the road. Notice verse 1 of chapter 11. Now when they drew near Jerusalem, did Jesus have some place to go? He was on his way to Jerusalem. In fact, what happens beginning in chapter 11 in the book of Mark? Jesus rides a colt into the city, and they praise him, laying olive branches down in front of him. He institutes the Lord's Supper. He is betrayed. He is crucified. And he raises from the dead. Jesus had some place to be. He had things to do. He had people to see. But yet, like that of Peter, he always had the time to give his time to those who were in need. Tell me, are we too busy to give our time? We think we are, but we're not. And you know what? Let's just be honest. We can always find the time to do other things, can't we? We can always find the time. Now somebody might say, well, you know what? I can't do the things that Jesus did. Well, no, we can't do that. We can't do the things that Jesus did through Peter. We cannot do that. Somebody might say, well, I don't always have all the answers. Well, duh. We may not always have the answers. But you know what they will appreciate more than whether we can have the answers to their problem or not? Just to spend a little bit of time with them.
Jesus showed his humanity by one occasion, or escaping occasion. He needed a break.
He needed a break.
He needed a break. He got the ship, sailed across the lake, and they followed him around.
Yeah.
But at least he got a little bit of a break from it.
He got a little bit of a break.
But he was, to the point that he was weary,
Yeah.
apparently, because he learned a break.
And you want an example that is eye-opening? Who else did Jesus have time for? Had time for the woman at the well, but who else did he have time for? For you and me.
Us, yes.
He had time for humanity. Humanity was in need, wasn't it? They were in need because they were lost in their sins, but yet Jesus had the time to give his time for us. We need to find the time to help those that are in need. We need to be just like that of Peter. Peter had the time, and he spent that time. He used that time. And because of what he did, will the lame man be forever grateful? Certainly will. And so will those people that we spend time with. But you know what else Peter and John did? They not only spent time with the man who was in need, but they also showed that man some sympathy and some kindness. Some sympathy and some kindness. Now let's just be honest, friends. Do we always do that? That is honest. The honest answer. We don't always show sympathy and kindness to those who are in need. Let's just suppose for just a minute we're walking down Putnam Street. And we see out in front of us, maybe sitting, let's say he's sitting in front of People's Bank Theater. And he's sitting there on the sidewalk and he's all twisted up and he's holding out his hand. Many times what do? We walk right on by. Many times we get over as far on the sidewalk as we possibly can. Sometimes we even do what? Well, sometimes we cross the street and we go down the other side. Here's another example. Let's say we're walking on Putnam Street once again. We look down the street about a block away. And we see Sister Bonnie coming towards us. And we think to ourselves, oh, no, wait a minute, Bonnie's got problems. She's in need right now. She's got a problem. But many times, what do?
Duck into the store.
We duck into a store, or we go across the street. Down the other side, maybe we do a little bit of window shopping so that we pretend that looks like that we didn't see it. Sound familiar? In fact, friends, when we do that, and it's sad that we do it. We do it when we're in Walmart. It doesn't have to be on Putnam Street. We see somebody coming down one aisle. What do? We duck into another aisle. Right? We do that. We do that. What are we being like? Or who are we being like? We're being like the priest and the Levite in the parable of the Good Samaritan. You can read the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's in Luke the 10th chapter. We're not going to take the time here tonight to read it. But very basically what we have is we have a man that was traveling from Jerusalem, if I remember correctly, and he was beaten up and he was robbed and he was left half for dead. By chance, a priest come along. And he saw the man and he went across the road and down the other side. Followed by a Levite who saw the man who crossed the road and went down the other side. Now, according to Old Testament law, that priest and that Levite was supposed to do what? They were supposed to help him. Now, somebody might say, okay, now wait a minute. Where's that at? Well, turn to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy. Chapter 22. Deuteronomy 22. Let's begin reading in verse 1. Deuteronomy 22, beginning in verse 1. Thou shalt not see thy brother's oxen or his sheep go astray, and hide thyself from them. Thou shalt not in any case bring them again. Thou shalt in any case bring them again unto thy brother. And if thy brother be not nigh unto thee, or thou know him not, then thou shalt bring it into thy own house, and it shall be with thee until thy brother seek after it, and thou shalt restore it to him again. In like manner shalt thou do with his ass. So shalt thou do with his raiment, with all lost thing of thy brothers, which he hath lost, and thou hast found. Thou shalt do likewise. Thou mayest not hide thyself. Thou shalt not see thy brother's ass or his oxen fallen down by the way, and hide thyself from them. Thou shalt surely help him to lift them up again. You see someone in need. The law was you help them. You go to Exodus 23 in verses 4 and 5. God tells the Old Testament people, the Israelites even back then, that if your enemy is in need, you help them. In verse 5, if someone who you know hates you is in need, you help them. And so that priest and that Levite, according to the Old Testament law, was to help this man. But they didn't. We don't need to be like them. But rather we need to be like this Good Samaritan, who when he saw the man was in need, he got down from his beast of burden, he got down from whatever he was riding. He went over to the man, he helped the man, he dressed the man's wounds, he placed him upon his beast of burden, he took him to some place where he can be cared for, and even left money that he could be cared for. That's exactly what that's exactly what Peter and John did. When they were going through that beautiful gate and they saw that man, could they have just ignored him?
Yeah.
Could they have gone in through another gate? Yeah. If you remember from our comments weeks ago, there were several gates that went into the temple area. So Peter and John, when they saw that man, they could have said, oh, wait a minute, we don't want to go in this gate, and went into another one. But instead, they came up to the man. They gave him time. They showed him sympathy. They showed him kindness. They did whatever needed to be done. You know what that is, friends? That's Christianity. That's Christianity at its finest. You know, it may be that we know of somebody that's in need. And we don't always have the financial means that we can help them. But sometimes they don't need that type of help. Sometimes they need just someone to spend some time with them, to show them a little bit of sympathy, to show them a little bit of kindness. That's what we need to do, just like Peter and John did. We want to extend the invitation. If we have anyone here this evening who needs to come in obedience to the gospel of Jesus Christ, why not come tonight? Why not come right now? If you're a part of the body, you have erred in your faith in some way, come and make things right.